Welcome to the Grow Your Practice podcast. Hi, I'm your host, Chad Madden, owner of Madden Physical Therapy and Breakthrough. Join me each week as we dive into the best practices, systems, principles, tips, and tricks to help you grow your private practice.
Hey everybody, Chad here with the Grow Your Practice podcast. And today we have a very special guest. Lisa Flexner is the founder of Flex Health. And Lisa, you've built Flex Health into a leading consultancy focused on people-centered clinics. But before we get started, how did you get started? How did you become a physical therapist? How did you get into the industry? And thanks for hopping on the podcast here.
Absolutely. It is an honor to be here. I'm so grateful to you for having me on and to Ben Wabker for connecting us. I know he's a great friend of this podcast and he's a great friend of mine as well. I'm really grateful to him for all of his support. I have it's less unusual now than it was when I went into physical therapy, but I have a bit of an odd background. So I came into physical therapy as a career changer. I had started out in executive coaching. My very, very first job was working for an executive coaching firm before the term executive coach existed. They were the people that helped define the market, which was really fascinating. And I learned a ton. They then inspired me to get my degree in my degree in psychology and a master's in organizational studies. And in fact, at the time I was planning on becoming a licensed clinical psychologist. I realized I didn't really want to do clinical psychology. I wanted to do coaching, but coaching wasn't it really wasn't an industry at the time. So I went into management consulting and worked in change management for a while, then into the tech industry where I was in program management, meaning operations, and product management, meaning marketing, inbound marketing specifically. And then throughout that time, I really liked what I was doing, but I never loved it. And it wasn't meeting my whys. In fact, the last tech industry job that I had was creating more pop-up ads on the internet, which was not very soul fulfilling. So I kept looking around and I looked at the Peace Corps. I looked at a master's in health administration. I looked at a master's in public administration and thought about going into government. I looked at law school. I looked at business school. I looked at all sorts of options and none of them felt right. And then in that same last tech industry job, I went on a team building and I built the team by spending the day in the emergency room with my boss. So my brand new boss of 4 days.
What happened?
We went on a team building to go skiing and I dislocated and broke my shoulder on like the third run of the day. So I'd had physical therapy before, but it had been kind of not the kind of physical therapy that I ended up being drawn to do. It had been kind of your standard old school 1980s style physical therapy that just wasn't really getting to root causes. It was just kind of treating symptoms. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't super inspiring. But this time, I had 3 months of prehab, then surgery, and then 6 months of rehab to get my shoulder function back because I tore everything. And I absolutely fell in love. I realized the only days I liked going to work were the days I got to finish with physical therapy. And then I was asking so many questions of my PT that finally she said, you know what? You really need to just go to PT school. Like I'm done. I can't answer any more of your questions. They're too strong. And I just need you to go to PT school and become a PT and join my profession. And I was like, this huge light bulb went off over my head. And I was like, yes, this. So fast forward a few years, I've been in clinical practice. I did my residency and my fellowship in manual therapy. Absolutely loved being a clinician, but I also wanted to scale my impact. And I started in academia. And, in PT 1-to-1, clinics at most, I'm touching about 25 people a week. And granted, I get to literally touch my customers in this case. So that was rather nice. But I'm only touching maybe 25 people a week in a full-time practice. That caps the number of people I can impact over the course of a year. And I realized that one way that I could scale was going into academia. So I got recruited back into University of Washington, where I did my Doctor of Physical Therapy degree. While I was in fellowship, they called me and said, "Hey, can you come back in and assist in the classroom?" And I was like, "Heck yes." And loved it. Absolutely loved that. Fast forward, I continued to balance clinical and academic work for quite a long time, and then had an opportunity to move into academia full-time at Oregon State University here at OSU Cascades in Bend, Oregon. And that was amazing. And we'll talk more about how it wasn't amazing and how I changed again, because it's part of why I do what I do with Flex Health. But after I left Oregon State University, I realized I had a unique opportunity to take all of the different hats that I'd worn through the years and really help up-level the people side of healthcare organizations and practices and companies that are aligned with creating health in the community in a way that really filled my bucket, but also met some open needs in our profession.
Nice. All right. So a lot of questions on what you just shared. First of all, just so our listeners have an idea, how long of a timeline did you just share there? Because that was 5 years. My brain's going to explode.
That was not 5 years.
Yeah, was that 2 years or?
That was, let's see, I had my 30th college reunion last year.
Okay, great. So I got it. And that's 30th from the business consulting?
30th reunion for my undergrad degree.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Are you allowed to share the consulting management company that you started with?
Sure. I started with Anderson Consulting.
Nice.
Yeah, it was great. It's now Accenture for those of you that are not as old as I am. And I actually, one of my big consulting projects, my last consulting project with Anderson was helping to build the HR systems that allowed them to separate from what was then Arthur Anderson, because they were a sub-brand of Arthur Anderson. And as it turned out, once they separated, the timing was fortuitous because Arthur Anderson died in the Enron scandal of 1998. What was that? 1998? No, 2008, when the market crashed.
Yeah. 2000.
Yep.
Very good. Okay. Love that. You also mentioned a super important term that I just want to make sure we clarify for everybody: change management.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that most of us as practice owners and our listeners really struggle with. And, an easy example that I can think of off the top of my head is like changing from using EMRA over to EMRB, right? That's one form of change management.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how basically poor we are as practice owners implementing change management, and what are some of the problems that you see the average practice owner going through?
It's really interesting. We as clinicians go through PT school, through naturopathy, through med school, with very little training of the foundations of how to run a business. Chiropractic is a little bit different. There's a significant amount of business training within chiropractic. It's almost an mini MBA when you're getting your doctor of chiropractic. Yeah. Most other healthcare professions kind of forget the business of healthcare. Physicians graduate without any understanding of the insurance environment. Physical therapists graduate without any understanding of what cash flow really means. Or what is a balance sheet? How do you read it? And why does showing up at work impact the balance sheet? So getting back to your question about change management, we certainly are not trained in that. And change management is basically recognizing that we have humans in the workplace and we can't just flip a switch and turn on a new system. We can from an IT standpoint, sure. But in terms of adoption, in terms of integration, in terms of people being able to make that switch, you're likely to have quite a bit of resistance. Resistance is normal to change. Resistance to change is normal. And you're likely to have quite a bit of resistance to any change. So change management is doing the work up front before you flip that switch to have your team ready for whatever significant process, policy, or IT change that you're putting into place.
Got it. So it's today we do it this way. Tomorrow we're going to do it another way. And how do we roll that out so we're not getting a whole bunch of complaints and evil looks from our
Exactly. And maybe even not how do we roll it out, but what should it look like?
Great.
Right? Start if you go all the way back upstream.
Awesome. So you mentioned team building. I really want to dive into this because I know that this is your wheelhouse. So you did some work with Jim Collins. I know when you and I talked in preparation for this call, I had shared that, Good to Great, all the other Jim Collins works, even the Flywheel, I forget what it's called, monograph, I think is what he calls it, 40-page book. We've been through that. I know Jim Collins, Vern Harnish, Gino Wickman, whoever is in the space talking about business, they always lead with people first. If you don't have the right people on the bus, it's going to be a problem. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think you have a very unique perspective from your career before private practice. But can you talk about why that is the most important place to start if a practice is looking to scale, leave a bigger impact in their area, maybe build a more valuable practice? Why do we start with people first? Why isn't it marketing or financial systems or operations or something like that?
Yeah, I love that question. So coming back to Jim Collins, Jim is the reason I went to Stanford. I only met him once. It was in high school when I was looking at colleges, and I had the grades to go to the elite schools, and my parents were determined to make that possible for me if they could. And we'd gone out to the East Coast, and I'd hated every single one of the Ivies. Sorry if anybody's an Ivy League grad. It was not going to be the right fit for me. It wasn't the right culture. It wasn't the right place for me to be. And my dad had a speaking gig out in Berkeley. And he said, why don't you come with me? We can visit Cal and then I'll take you to Stanford. And I was like, not going to Stanford. I'll visit Cal with you. I'll go to the speaking gig. I want to go to the schools in Southern California and check those out. So Dad took me there. Didn't particularly like Berkeley either. As it turned out, that was a good choice because I landed as a Cardinal and it would have been awkward if I thought Berkeley was a good place. I was hanging out. He went to the first day of the conference. He comes back. He's like, you have to meet somebody. And he sits me down with Jim Collins. And Jim's like, Lisa, there are 3 things you need to know. Number 1, at Stanford, it never rains. Not entirely true, but coming from Minnesota in comparison, the weather is fantastic. Number 2, it's rarely less than 70 degrees. Also a bit of a stretch, but not inaccurate and not 30 below. So again, winning. And number 3, you're going to fall in love with campus the minute you set foot on it. And he was right. I think I took 10 paces onto campus before I was like, I have to go here. And I got lucky. I got in. Built to Last came out while I was there. And Built to Last was the first book that he put out. And unfortunately, most of the companies in Built to Last didn't last. But the chapter that really stuck with me from that, and that then he took into Good to Great, and from there to the Flywheel and all of the rest of the work that he's done, was about cult-like cultures. And I really believe in the power of culture to define organizations. What we know from lots of different data, lots of different researchers, is that your people drive your business. Nothing you do is more powerful than getting your people on board and on that same pathway with you toward a shared mission and a shared goal. That work is reflected in productivity. It's reflected in profitability. It's reflected in low turnover. In fact, I want to get the name right. There's an Oxford professor named, looking it up here, Jan Emmanuel Deneuve. And he actually did a study that showed that an investment portfolio of companies with high levels of workplace engagement and workplace well-being outperforms the stock market. So you're getting much better value from all of the other things that you're trying to do when the people on your team are functioning as a team and not as a set of individuals who just happen to share a workplace.
Yeah. Great. Let's talk about that for a second. So I'm a practice owner. Our listeners are going to be practice owners that are tuning in the chiropractic, physical therapy, dentistry, podiatry. I know is in here as well, functional medicine across the board. So I'm a doctor, I'm a clinician, I'm running a practice, I'm into this. I get that having the right culture, because usually we have a jaded experience, right? Someone fit the culture. It's very apparent. We don't want to repeat that mistake again. What's the first step or two that I can take to build a better culture within my practice?
The very first thing is to know what your practice stands for.
Yeah.
A lot of folks define a mission and define values and vision because it's in all the information from the Small Business Administration or private practice section or whatever that says, here's how you build a strategic plan. But they don't necessarily put meaning behind that mission and those values. And honestly, a vision, I can take or leave. But understanding my organization's mission and understanding my values in a well-designed organization drives every single decision I make. So if I have an opportunity to go to an EMR that's new and I want to figure out, does this make sense? And I want my team to be on board, I have to know, does it match with and support my mission? And does it fit within what I say my values are? And by I mean the organizations in this case. So the very first thing is, do you know what your mission and your values are? And the second thing is, how do you choose to intentionally align what you are doing day to day in your operations, what you are setting up in your policies and procedures with that mission and those values? And third is, when you're recruiting, how do you talk about those things so that you are drawing in the right people and folks are selecting to be part of that team?
Love it. Great. So can we deep dive into that for a little bit?
Let's do it.
Okay, great. And the one thing that we've done repeatedly throughout my private practice career is hire outside coaching. I try to do it on my own. Most of us, when we open up into private practice, we were starry-eyed and we provide high quality of care. We're going to rely on word of mouth referral, and we ignore every other system that needs to happen in order for us to be in front of a patient. So we open up, we quickly discover there's a lot more to it than just providing high quality of care. And now we realize that we have to learn all these other things. Like 1 year in, I started hiring coaching, loved it. I'm going to guess it was 10 or 12 years ago. We were going through with our leadership team here, and we said, okay, let's do this core values exercise and do exactly what you're talking about, Lisa, which is define what do we mean when we say, because everybody can say integrity, which is really just like table stakes or honesty or something. Yeah, of course we want to hire honest and high integrity individuals. But then, so what we started doing was like reverse engineering, and I went around and talked with our best performing clinicians. And what I mean by best performing is high graduation rate. Mm-hmm. That means if they see 20 new patients in a month, that 16 or more are going to meet their goals, not drop off, but meet their goals and then graduate from the plan of care. It was 3 in a row said this: when I'm working with somebody and they're not doing well, it makes me sick to my stomach. Mm-hmm. And we had 3 in a row. I was like, ooh, we're on. And I hadn't shared this with them, but I used to go through the same thing. And I can remember 25 years later, people that I saw as a new grad coming out, patients that I wasn't helping them improve their symptoms. Sometime there was a red flag that I missed or something in the differential diagnosis, or maybe I was treating the wrong root cause, doing like symptom that you're talking about. So we made that part of our core values, and we call it insistence on outcomes. And then we explain exactly what that means.
Genius.
When we're doing our interviews, and we follow Top Grading, it's now called Who by Randy Street and Jeff Smart. Mm-hmm. And I think Jim Collins gave his approval on their hiring process, if I remember right. But as we're going through that, we look for signs where, are they gritty enough to go with their gut? Like, do they have a strong gut, and are they going to ignore it, or have they acted on it? So we look for things in their behavioral history that make sure where we say, oh, they're one of us. So thinking of that, how would you walk an owner through? Is that what you would have them do? Would you have them do something different to clearly define, what are the 2 or 3 things that make us who we are? Who are we looking for? What common things are we looking for in team members?
Yeah. I think one of the nice things that you did there is that you didn't go in with a closed-ended question. You went in with an open-ended question, like, what makes you in this workplace? Why do you like this workplace? What makes it stick? What makes you want to stick around?
Yeah.
Right? And you got the same response you started to see the patterns and the threads. So that's one thing to really think about, is that open-ended question and asking people just to talk. I can run focus groups, or I have run focus groups for organizations that just start to develop the themes. In academia, we call it qualitative research, but it's focus groups, right? It's just understanding the themes that are coming out from those individuals. And number 2, I think what a lot of clinic owners forget to do is ask about, how does this theoretical concept, say compassion, how does this relate to all my stakeholders? A lot of times, especially as clinicians, we're so patient focused that we're like, we are going to be compassionate to our patient. But if compassion is a core value, shouldn't that also apply to the employees and have compassion for each other? Start from a place of compassion in supporting or managing folks. Shouldn't it also apply to the leadership, where they get some grace for maybe not doing everything exactly right or exactly the way that their staff would want, right? Compassion is a nice phrase, but how does it get implemented for all of the different stakeholder groups, not just for our core patients, for our core customer?
Love it. The one thing that you mentioned that we talked about before is burnout. And I know that's a buzzword right now. So we have the right team on board. We're, most of us are tracking metrics across the board, and we see somebody, maybe it's very apparent in what we see in their workflow, but can you talk about burnout? I know that you've said also that it's not a personal problem, it's a systems problem. Can you go through exactly what you mean by that? And what's burnout? How should we be thinking about it? And how do we handle it as a practice owner?
So warnings, practice owner handling and defining it.
Yep.
Okay. So I really lean into Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter's work. They defined burnout really in the 1990s. The word comes from actually fiction much earlier. But Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter really defined it operationally within organizational studies. And they are still the biggest researchers. There are many models of burnout, but most of them lean on the work of Maslach and Leiter, and it's very easy to understand. So I start from there. And they define burnout as a combination of exhaustion, ineffectiveness, and cynicism. You can be exhausted and not be burned out. Mm-hmm. You can be ineffective and not be burned out. When cynicism starts to come in, you're likely to also have some exhaustion and some ineffectiveness, leading to a little disengagement. And that's kind of the real start of that burnout continuum. And then when you have true burnout, you have kind of moderate to high levels of all 3 of those things, exhaustion, cynicism, and ineffectiveness. So when you are looking for things that might be cueing that one of your employees is starting to burn out, you can look for how tired they are. You can look for if they're starting to talk about being really, really struggling to get the outcomes that they're used to, feeling ineffective, feeling like their work doesn't make that much difference. hearing them talk about it so that you can catch them at the exhaustion or ineffective stage. What you don't really want is that introduction of cynicism if you can help it. But if you start hearing somebody sound cynical, that's a real trigger that now is a good time to intervene. And I think...
Can you give an example or two of that? Like how that goes out? Yeah.
Cynicism. Why do I even bother coming to work? Evacor is just going to cut off what I can do. And, I can only see this patient 5 times. Or I'm doing concierge medicine, and it's great. Or I'm doing cash pay and I'm getting paid great. But man, there are a whole lot of people who aren't getting care. And that just really is breaking my heart.
Yeah. Thanks. Good.
Yeah. So figuring out, those are some of the warning signs. Then what you can do is make sure that you're listening, that you spot those warning signs. So my dear friend and colleague from way back in the PT school days, Mark Bama, who works with Ben Wapker at Lake Washington Physical Therapy, at his clinic, he schedules 15-minute check-ins with every single employee, every single week. That sounds like a lot. It really does. It sounds like it's going to take so much time. But the amount of time it saves because he hears about problems very early in the process is tremendous. It's also straight out of Kim Scott's recent book, Radical Candor, which is all about working in the tech industry.
Yep.
But it's totally applicable here in healthcare.
Yeah. Great book, by the way. We'll put the link for that in the show notes. That was a solid one that I read in the past year. Cool. So you mentioned that you talked about how it's a systems problem. Anything else that we should dive into on burnout before we move to industry trends? But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Burnout is a huge thing. So burnout is an individual response to a systems problem, but it so often gets diagnosed as a you problem. It's just, you don't like to work hard, or you're just not capable, or, it's a you problem. If you just had a few more skills, you could fix this. And what I learned in my own personal journey is when that started happening, I was stunned. I was like, I am a 2-time cancer survivor. I changed careers. I got through PT school while being in cancer treatment. Like, I know that I'm resilient, and I know that I not only can handle hard things, but I like handling hard things. So why do I feel so unable to do my job right now?
Yeah.
And what it really is it's not anyone's fault. It's not the individual. It's not the manager. It's not the organization. It's not the job. It is the combination of all of those within a system that creates the problem that leads to burnout.
Yeah. Just from real world experience, I'll agree with everything across the board there. We've addressed it in many different ways. Sometimes it's the flow for the team member. Maybe like the one that I remember seeing was somebody who saved all of their notes until lunchtime or the end of the day, their documentation, because they felt that they were robbing the patient of an experience by taking time to document what they were doing. So we addressed that, changed the system there. Another one that happened recently was just the wrong setting. The clinician was like, I want to be doing peds or acute care or something else, and this isn't right for me. And then we just help them make that transition. Very good there.
Yeah, let me jump in on that. One of the things that I always like to talk to students about was physical therapy time horizons. As an outpatient orthopedic practice, my time horizon was somewhere between 4 weeks and 12 weeks typically, and a long engagement might be 20 weeks. When I was in my pediatric rotation, I might be seeing that same patient for 20 years. Yeah. And I realized, that's too long. But in acute care, for me, 3 days wasn't long enough. 3 days in acute care wasn't long enough to build the relationship that I wanted. So I selected the time horizon of outpatient orthopedics. That was where my fit was because of how I could build a relationship with people.
Smart. I've never heard that before, that perspective, but it makes a ton of sense. Cool. industry trends and the changing workforce, I know even at our own breakthrough events, this will commonly come up where we'll talk about challenges with team building. And then there's usually some generational thing of like, oh, nobody wants to work today. I'm bastardizing
Kids these days, I tell you.
Exactly. So we hear that quite often. I remember certain generations saying that to me when I was coming out of school or my graduating class. So can you talk about, Gen Z specifically, how you think about that, how you help owners? I know you wrote an article on that in Impact Magazine as well. Can you talk about what are most owners doing wrong and how should we be thinking about that as we're hiring the entry-level grads coming out?
I love this question because as an older clinician, more experienced, or perhaps more aged,
Yes.
right? I'm vintage, like fine wine. But the assumption is that it's a Gen Z problem. It's a generational problem. I've heard leaders, whether in academia or in practice, really throw Gen Z under the bus. They don't like to work hard. They're entitled. They're snowflakes. No one wants to show up for work. And the data shows that's actually not true. What we're seeing, first of all, generational stereotypes are a lot of BS. Over and over and over, the data shows that what you're seeing is culture change that happens to correlate with generational shifts. Mm-hmm. But it is not exclusive to those generations, right? Millennials, Gen Z, Gen Xers even are coming into the workplace now saying, hey, my mental health matters. What are you doing as an employer to support my mental health? Really what we're seeing is that culture change. And in fact, what you alluded to of other generations talking smack about ours, is I found, as I was researching for that Impact Magazine article that'll come out in September, I found an article in the APA Monitor that was about kids these days just don't want to work very hard. They're going to job hop. They have no loyalty, this, that, and the other. It was written in 2002 about Gen Xers. And I was like, I captured the quote because it was exactly what I've heard from leadership right now who are Gen Xers. And it made me laugh so hard. The fact is that Gen Z, perhaps even more than some of their previous generations, do want to work hard. In fact, we all do. It's a basic psychological need for competence. We all want to work hard. But this generation was raised with a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. They were also raised with the experience of watching their parents and even their grandparents get promises from employers, work really, really hard, and then not have that payoff, whether that's an unexpected layoff, a closure of the company. My grandparents got pensions. My parents didn't get pensions. I got a pension at OSU, but I think that's pretty rare. I have one friend who their kids are Gen Alpha and they are getting pensions, and it's like mind blowing to me. But folks are seeing that there wasn't the payoff. They saw their elders work incredibly hard and not get that much back, and not get any loyalty back from the employer. That part of the employer-employee agreement was violated at some point, probably in the 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm. And so this generation, we'll talk younger clinicians, but again, it crosses generations. They want to see payoff for themselves. Gen Z as a population also is much more versed in concepts of mental health, for good and for bad, right? Because there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, dumbing down of true psychological concepts into buzzwords. But they are likely to prioritize their mental health. And so a lot of leaders are struggling with things like absenteeism. So I know that's a big concern. What do we do when our clinician calls in and is like, I just can't come to work today. I need a mental health day. Right?
Yeah.
So thinking about how your policies address this issue and how you can support your employees and their mental health is really important, because you got to keep the doors open so that you can keep giving them a job, so that you can hold up your end of the employer-employee agreement. One solution is to be really transparent about the impact of calling in on business and patients, and then work with your staff to co-create both carrots and sticks, right? Incentivizing showing up when it's hard, acknowledging that hard days happen and not penalizing, but if a penalty is appropriate, that's one that they've bought into, not something that seems out of their control. The fact is that 84% of workers note at least one workplace issue that negatively impacts their mental health. And we know that mental health impacts work, but now we've got data that work is impacting mental health. So if you don't know what's happening in your clinic, if you don't know how to support that or what solutions would work for those people, it becomes very difficult to keep them coming in ways that support your patients and support keeping the doors open and the lights on.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, years ago, we figured out that playing games, recognition, acknowledgement go a very long way. So the sticks and carrots, we do a lot of carrots, at least in our practice. And I know Ben does a really nice job of doing that in Lake Washington. And cool. So love that. I know the one thing that we had talked about previously is and you started to allude to it here, there can be high turnover. So under 30, and by the way, you said Gen Alpha, what age range is that?
So Gen Z goes through 2012. Anyone born after 2012 is Alpha.
Oh, did not know that. That's a new one. Okay, got it. So I have a lot of Alpha kids. Okay, cool. The average retention from one statistic that I've read within the industry is 1.3 years for the 24 to 30-year-olds. Can you talk about, and I know this is on, it's a big concern for a lot of practice owners, clinical directors, managers, et cetera, that the idea of retention and like preventing churn, staff retention, something along those lines. They'll go by different names, but in labels. But can you talk about how do we prevent that in addition to everything else that you're talking about here? So narrowing our core values, checking in, on a weekly pulse, just checking in with every team member. What are some other things practice owners can do to mitigate that? Because it's so expensive to go out and hire somebody, through the retraining, all that other. It's very costly to go through staff turnover. So what can we possibly do in this market?
Yeah.
Obviously, our generation was the best.
Just to put some numbers around that.
That was a joke at the end.
Yeah. Well, our generation is the best.
Yeah.
Just to put some numbers around that, the Gallup estimates that any given employer loses approximately 15 to 20% of their payroll to turnover. So if you have 10 clinicians at $100,000 each, so your payroll is $1 million, you're spending an additional $150,000 to $200,000 per year on turnover. Another way, if you think about it on the individual level, is each turnover costs about 2 to 3 times your average salary. Now, you gave the statistic of 1.3 years average tenure. 25% of Gen Z has switched jobs in the last month.
Wow.
Right? Mostly because they're leaving to find better mental health support, according to some of the research. So, gosh, how do we handle that? That is a lot. There are a few different things here that I think are real opportunities. Number one is understanding the value changes that we're seeing. So again, coming back to your organizational values, Do they align with the values of these changing cultures that we're seeing? 70% of Gen Zers are looking for values matches between their own personal values and the organization's values. So if your values are stuck in a time that no longer reflects this current time, that could be a problem. I know that DEI is currently not a valued term, but the truth is this generation is the most diverse generation in our country's history. Mm-hmm. And they significantly value, as a whole, they significantly value diversity in leadership, diversity in workplace, and they want to see how your organization supports that. Many folks in Gen Z won't work for an organization that doesn't have diversity in leadership, mm-hmm. for instance. So looking at whether or not you believe in DEI as a phrase, looking at how you can align your company's values better with the values of this upcoming generation is one way to support recruiting and retention. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of others, though, that I think are really interesting opportunities. The first is that healthcare fundamentally has a belonging problem. So we come into the clinic, we go to our rooms or our workstations, we work our tails off for 8 to 12 hours a day, we leave, and if we're lucky, we have time to say hello to a coworker in passing, right? Mm-hmm. But we don't have opportunities to establish consistent and meaningful interaction with a colleague in the workplace. Now, Jamil Zaki out of Stanford has done research about this, and younger clinicians and college students, our future clinicians, crave social connectedness, but they're cautious and hesitant about reaching out. So what can you do as a leader to build social connectedness and solve the belonging problem? Belonging, again, being one of those basic psychological needs that we have within the workplace. So Steve Rapicelli out in Delaware, he and I met earlier this year, and he was telling me, we were talking about this sort of stuff. He was telling me, I asked my people, and what they asked for was adult coloring books in the lunchroom. And I didn't get it, but I bought them. And they're so much happier. And I was thinking about this. Adult coloring books in the lunchroom, under $50 solution. Creates a mental break for somebody. They don't have to be charting all the time. Gives them something creative. It also creates an opportunity for connection. And it builds trust with the employer because these folks asked for something that Steve didn't get, but he went and did it anyway. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, this under $50 investment has made a huge difference in how his employees feel at work. That's a great turn. Another thing to think about, another place for intervention is technology, right? These younger clinicians are largely digital natives, millennials on down, and particularly Gen Z. They want the tech that they have access to at work to be as easy to use as a social media app. And yet our healthcare tech historically has perhaps been stuck in the 90s. It's getting better. There's a lot of good technology out there, but there's a fear of moving. Transition is very hard. Changing EMR, we know, is very hard. Again, going back to that change management question. How can you make tech decisions that make your employees' lives easier? And perhaps it is worth the investment. Yeah. And a great example of that, AI scribing.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I thought of as soon as you brought that up, because we rolled that out in one clinic, and now all the other clinics want to do the same thing because of how easy it is. Right. AI scribing. We also see it in treatment technology. Mm-hmm. One clinic gets something like Run DNA is something we just rolled out. So
nice.
Or light force laser or shock, mm-hmm. or whatever it might be. The other clinicians in the other offices want access to that as well, including other clinicians that are working outside of our company.
Yeah.
So completely agree with you there. trick question for you here, Lisa. I know you work with a lot of different practices. Who, like, for our listeners that are hearing you right now, they want to improve their culture, they want to go through these exercises, and they want to work with Flex Health. Who's it for? So what does the practice owner look like? And I know you work with very large organizations and some smaller practices as well. Who's the ideal client that is working with Flex Health?
I really like working with the small to mid-sized organizations or a small to mid-sized team within a larger organization. So really, again, that personal connection was important to me as a clinician. It's still really important to me. So I've got one client, actually not a healthcare provider, but senior living, that is doing focus groups. And those focus groups are to help build belongingness, to help understand some of the challenges of working in a senior living environment. And we're keeping it really small right now, focused on one particular facility, with the intent that just like your practice adopts technology based on what one team does and sees the benefit, that we roll it out across everything. But you don't want to go, ideally, you don't want to go so big that it's a massive, massive effort. That's not, at least I don't. That's not my wheelhouse. I really love that small to mid-size organization, a large private practice, but not necessarily a corporate practice.
So like 1 to, let's call it 25 million in rev.
Yeah.
Something like that is small, medium size. Okay, very good. And what's the best way for listeners to get a hold of you or learn more about Flex Health?
Absolutely. So the website is flexhealthconsulting.com. And I'll specify that because there are other Flex Healths out there that focus on very different things. But flexhealthconsulting.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Lisa-Flexner-DPT is my handle there. Those are the best ways to get a hold of me, but you can also find me. I've got a bunch of upcoming talks. So I'll be at Private Practice Section conference in Orlando in November. I'll be at CSM in Anaheim next February. So if you're a physical therapist, those are great places to come find me. I've got a number of other state and national association things in the works that I can't wait to announce on LinkedIn. So hopefully folks will follow me there, because that's where you're going to find out the latest. And get a hold of me if you want speaking or consulting work, leadership coaching. If you're realizing if this has sparked some ideas and you want help working through them and implementing them in your organization.
Nice. Awesome. Lisa, this has been great. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.